A lot of times when you're using a spreadsheet, you have different data types, and you may just know what they are and you never really think about it, but understanding what these different types are can help you build more effective formulas and troubleshoot when problems come around. So we'll talk about how to use the type function, and what it does is, we'll just type it out here, no pun intended. Just use the word type, and Sheets is telling you it gets the type of a value. So you just give it one value at a time. In this case, we want to look at what's in A1. So I'll click on that on my mouse. We'll close it off. And the type function returns a 1. I'm actually going to let it autofill at this point. So I'll just click this check mark. But let's still talk about the 1. The type function outputs an integer, and each of those integers is mapped to a data type. All right, so the 1 means number. I want to move these two, they're in the wrong order. It's got a flow, right? Next data type that I have is just obviously text. So when I run the type function on that, it returns a 2. And as we talked about in previous videos, you also get a hint as to the data type. So you're probably not going to be running the type function on items this simple. We'll move on to a little bit more complicated things next. But you can see by the 16, it shifts to the right, which gives you a hint that it's text. We'll select all of these, and I'll just ensure that the formatting is cleared. So this is a default formatting. Number shifts to the right, text to the left. And then the next data type, which is a true or a false. Okay, so that's a Boolean data type or logical. Stays in the middle, as do errors. Type function is running on these as well. And it's telling us that this is Boolean, so that's a 4. And this is an error. That's a 16. So there are two more data types here. One is an array. An array is a little bit tricky to use with the type function because by definition it's multiple pieces of data, so that usually doesn't reside in one cell. But what we can do, we can come down here and we can put a series of values in. Let's just make it into a square. And then when we run the type function on this, you can turn that into an array by, after the parentheses, also using a curly brace like that. And then I will reference that range, close it off with the curly brace and then the parentheses. That's an array only because you added these. So you might have never seen that in a spreadsheet before, but one of the things that may be helpful to understand is you can put that all in one cell. So let's just do the curly braces. We'll grab that cell reference, finish it off, and when I hit enter, it's going to write it out in multiple cells. All right, so that value is all just here, but it writes into all these cells. So the type function is going to call this an array, but it can be a little bit confusing because if you take those curly braces out and then just refer to this cell range by itself without the braces, it thinks that it's an error for some reason. So as we get further down this list, they get a little bit more obscure, right? And returning the 64 data type, you're probably never going to do this in your life, but it's important to understand what it means. So let's clear these out. And the last data type is just other. So that's kind of a catch-all for things in cells that aren't one of these other 4 values. So an example would be a spark line. And I'll try to build one here. I actually need to use the help, so we'll click on this blue question mark. So it wants the data. We'll run that on a spark line. So those are integers. That should work, even though they're outputs. And the rest is optional. So we don't need that. We'll close this off. There's a spark line. It's kind of cool looking. This was supposed to be a miniature line graph. And I'll grab the type function from B4. I'll copy it. I'll go into B6 and I'll paste it. So it's looking at this spark line. And it returns a 128. So you may be wondering why you would use the type function, right? Because we already talked about, you get a hint, this shifts to the right, you know it's a number, right? You know this is text, but you may need to use it if you're having a problem with a formula. So let's look at another example where, this is from an older video that I did. And this example is, if you have a series of dates and you try to sort them, they don't sort right because they're not all valid. All All right, so you could check to see if these are dates. So if I run the type function on this old spreadsheet, when I run it on A7, get this autofill to go away for now, it returns 1, which is saying this is a value. All right, so next we'll talk about the different types of numbers, because it's not intuitive that a date is a number. But that tells you that that date is right, because a properly formatted date is a number. If you drag this down to look at the next 3, here's your hint as to why this isn't sorting correctly, because this 4, 5, 18, if you look closely, there's an extra slash in there. And therefore, Google Sheets is evaluating that as text. It's just saying, well, that's a label. It's 4/5//18. I can't do anything else with it. So it just treats it as text. Next date is valid, so that returns a 1. And then the date after that isn't a valid date either. So November 6th, you put the TH on there, and then Google Sheets doesn't recognize this. So if I were to take the TH out, it goes to a number. And therefore the output of the type function changes. We'll undo that. So this is an example of how to use type to troubleshoot other issues that you're having in a spreadsheet. Before we move on for this, let me go to sheetshelp.com and show you the reference for this. So this is a page about the type function. These are the outputs that we were talking about. But let's keep in mind that as you use each one of these, oftentimes there's a more specific formula that may be helpful. So if you're checking for dates, I would usually just use the isDate function. All right, so that's going to return true if it's a date and false if it's not. And that will even help you if it's a different type of number. It will still return false. But the advantage of the type function is that it's all in one, right? So that will check if it's one of 6 values, where something like isDate may be more helpful if you're just trying to see if one value is a date. But you can't turn around and use it on text or Boolean values at the same time like you can with the date function. All right, let's dive into a few more examples of using the type function. We'll go to sheet 1 here. So this is the sheet that's linked to the web page. So if you go to the description, you'll be able to go to the web page. And this is what I used for the examples to write the website. Let's scroll down. It gets more specific. And we'll look at some of the different types of numbers. So the number 1 for the data type just means number, but it returns a number for all different types of situations. So it's just a number. So I just have 17 in here. That's going to return a 1, but also the output of a function that returns a number. So this is adding 29 and 44. Well, the result is a number, and it doesn't matter what the formatting is. So you could have it as a percent, you could have it in scientific notation, or you could have it as a date and time, which is what these are here. And then the last example is if you're just referencing an empty cell. So I'll click in this live formula. It's referencing C24. There's nothing there. So it evaluates as a 0 and returns a 1. We'll scroll down to the different types of text, and I have the straightforward example here. So it's just cat. You have to put it in parentheses so the spreadsheet knows that it's text. If I take these parentheses out, it will think it's a different type of value, and it returns a 16. So if we go up, a 16 means that it's an error. Okay, so if I were to have just typed equals cat, it would give you an error. So that's what's happening there. And that's why it is in quotes, because this would have to be a reference to a cell with the word cat, or it needs to be in quotes if you type it directly in. All right, so there's not much complexity to text. The other example I have here, which is kind of like what we talked about with dates a minute ago, is if you type out a number in a form that isn't recognized, like 100, it also just thinks that that is text. The same thing as if you typed an invalid date. All right, so the Boolean values we talked about already. This one is just evaluating the word false. So the words true and false don't need quotes because they're not text. They're Boolean values. You just type them straight in, or you can use a checkbox. Those both evaluate to a 4. All right, so there's several different types of errors. I made these errors happen a couple different ways. Here I just use a formula that isn't a real formula. You get the name error, that returns a 16. This is just a circular reference, so it's a reference to itself. And here I just divide it by 0. All right, so all of these evaluate to a 16. And then the wonky data type is arrays. And I took a series of numbers and wrapped them in those curly braces. And then I just did it with a cell reference that has numbers in it. They both return 64. And when we talked about other last time, we used a sparkline. Another example of that is an image. So this is just a little picture put into the cell, returns 128. All right, so a little bonus section for you here. One thing that you can do if you don't like it returning those numbers because you don't have memorized what a 1 is and a 2 and a 4, you can use the switch function to map them to the words. So the switch function just swaps one piece of data for another. So I'm saying if it returns a 1, change it to number. If it returns a 2, output the word text, 4, Boolean, etc. So the type function is in here and it's outputting one of these blue numbers, which is getting changed to one of the green text strings. So that's what the switch function does. And we'll hit enter and we'll see it in action. So a 0, we're looking at cell B60, 0's a number. We'll change it to text is here. It's text. Boolean. 9 divided by 0. It's an error. I'm trying to remember them all without looking back up. We'll do, let's see if I can put an array in here. The arrays are tricky. You just have to type them directly in here. I think in order for that to evaluate as an array, I would have to do this. Maybe like that. Guessing here, people. We'll say C60 and leave those braces in there. There we go. I got that to evaluate to as an array. And we will, that stays. Oh, that 99 is getting written. Yeah, so that's an array. And then we'll cheat. We'll come up here and grab the same image. We'll work smartly, I meant. Kind of clean this up so that it's just referencing B60 again. And it tells us that is other. You could get real fancy and change the word other to sparkline or image, but there are probably other types that fit in there. If they're not available now, they may be in the future. So I would just leave this as the word other. I had fun showing you the type function. If you like this video and you want to see others just like it, you can subscribe to Sheets Help in the lower right-hand corner, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.